Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. If you've put any research into Dogmen, it's almost inevitable that the term loopgaroo or rougarou would have popped up from time to time. If you saw those terms but didn't know what they are, tonight's guest is the perfect person to come on and educate you. Of course, I'm talking about Jack LaFountain. Jack, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Vic, for having me. I really enjoy the show. Glad to be here tonight.
Well, the honor's all ours. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Jack, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I am a retired nurse. I retired after 25 years of nursing just last January and have taken up writing full time. I've kind of done some of that through the years, but now have a chance to do it full time. So that's what I'm about these days. Also, a Vietnam era veteran and a former church pastor before I started into nursing. Kind of a diverse background.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. Before we go any further, I want to really thank you for your time and service to our country. I really appreciate it. Jack, is being a full-time author something you've always wanted to do, or is that a late development?
It is fairly new. Probably about the last 10 years. I published my first book in 2007, and to have the opportunity to write full-time since then has kind of been a dream. And when I got a chance to retire a little bit early, I kind of jumped on it so I could do that, and it's been great. I tell you, retirement, though, as a writer, I've been busier, I think, than I've ever been before. You know, a lot of people talk about that they would like to take up writing, and it sounds really great, and it is. I wouldn't discourage anybody at all from doing so. But it's always fun to start a story and maybe have an end in mind, but there always comes a point while you're in the writing process where it just becomes work. And you have to work through it if you're going to get to the end of the story and actually end up with a book. I have in my desk drawer, before I really got serious about it, probably 3 or 4 novels that I started and never finished.
It's funny you say that. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to sit down and actually be able to write a book. You say it's a fine line between being a storyteller and an author. Please expand on that for us.
Well, I think for most all my life, I tell people I've always been a storyteller. I've always enjoyed telling people stories and having them listen. I think the difference between that and being an author is there's that time of work that goes into, you know, a novel-length book. There's that time where it's just hard work and it seems like it's kind of drudgery. And in a way it is, but not really. It's just a necessary part of the process. And you don't always get that in storytelling. Usually in storytelling, you've got the idea already lined out, or you're telling a story that you've already finished. When you're writing a book, you're going along with it. And there are kind of 2 kinds of writers that we use the term in writing, that there are those who are plotters, that they plot out the story from beginning to end and many of the details that go in between. And then there are those that are called pantsers, which basically means they write by the seat of their pants. And I'm a pantser. I've tried plotting out stories, and to me, sometimes they just seem mechanical, or the process does. But I like to just sit down if I've got, like for the book that I have coming out, Bayou Moon. Basically, I had the whole first chapter just kind of come to me like watching a movie. And I sat down and started writing it, and you kind of let the characters speak to you and talk about where the action's going to go, what's going to come next. Even though you've got a general end in mind, I kind of let the characters and the story kind of unfold on their own. And so that's maybe the difference between there's not so much planning that goes into my writing anyways. But yeah, it's a fun process.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. You're here tonight because you recently wrote a book about Rugurus, Bayou Moon. Please tell us about your book first, and then please tell us about Rugurus.
Bayou Moon is sort of a new thing for me. It's the first time I've really done anything where there's a criminal investigation. The story is that one day in this little small town in Louisiana where there hasn't been a murder in recent history, and then suddenly one morning, one of the town characters is found dead. So he's not missed a day of work in 22 years, and then one morning he doesn't show up, and his boss comes looking for him, and they find him in his house, and he's been torn apart. And that starts the investigation going. The Rougarous in the story, which is a type of werewolf, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The story weaves around this Rougarous, but for a large part, the sheriff is the main character. It's how he deals with things that seem improbable or even impossible, and how he deals with people dying on his watch, and how does he do his duty, and like I said, his own disbelief and his loyalty and working within, it turns out, the legal system. What's the legal system say? What does justice say? And how do I balance the two so that I do serve and protect the people that have elected me to the office, yet I'm true to both of those things. I'm still seeing that justice is done. And over the course of the book, there are several murders, and he finally gives into the idea that, yes, something is, he begins thinking there are no monsters. Man's the greatest monster that there is. But then he finds out over the course of the story that, yes, there are monsters, and this monster is real. But this monster, again, kind of fitting with this theory, this monster is also a man. And so he has both of those to contend with. And anyways, he has to get ahead of the Rougarous to try and put an end to the crime spree and put an end to the death that's going on in his community without sparking complete turmoil. And so that's kind of the story of the book, and how he goes about doing that, how he goes about investigating the things that happen to him on the way. And your show is Dogman Encounters, and I know people, I've listened to the show and people talking about their encounters with Dogman, and it's a jarring experience. And if you're not really ready for something that seems just completely impossible, it really makes an impact on your life. And that's what happens to the sheriff in this story.
Yeah, it normally does make quite the impact, and understandably so. Now that you've told us about Bayou Moon, what can you tell us about Rugurus?
Rugurus is a type of the werewolf story. There are some that say that the whole werewolf idea, the werewolf legend, originated in France. And the word for werewolf in French is loup-garou, which loup for wolf, and garou is a man that becomes a beast. And that's sort of the idea behind the whole werewolf legend, that the werewolf is a man who turns into a wolf. And it kind of originates from the idea that we have that we can give ourselves so into anger and rage that we become beast-like. And that's the kind of the thought behind the legend. And in medieval times in France, if there was a house that was ransacked, well, the loup-garou did it. Or a child came up missing, well, the loup-garou did it. And they would go out then hunting for this person that would turn into a wolf and do those things. And they would catch somebody out in the woods, or they would find somebody that they thought acted strange and arrest them for being the loup-garou and the cause of all their trouble. And strangely, the whole trial process was sort of by popular vote. The magistrates would present the case, and then everybody would vote, is this fellow a loup-garou or is he not? And of course, it was very dangerous to vote and say that they were not, because then you were likely to be accused of being a Rougarou yourself, or that you were a witch. And so it was kind of whoever got caught met their end in the justice system really quick. The word Rougarou is a variation of the Loup-garou, and where that came from was in the area that's Canada today, but before then, it was a sort of a dialect change that took place between a mixed race of people in which the First Nation women that married the early French trappers, and mostly it was Cree, the Native American tribe that are the Cree, that this language came from. And Loup-garou became Rougarou. And when the migration from Acadia to Louisiana took place, that term kind of followed along. The Cajuns have a kind of easy kind of French. They like it to roll real easy, and Rougarou went a whole lot easier than Loup-garou, and so it kind of became the staple for that figure in Cajun lore. And so, because this is Dogman Encounters, I don't think that these are the same thing. People ask me, do you believe in werewolves? Because this is my second werewolf book. And people say, do you believe in werewolves? And I usually say, no, I don't believe in the werewolf. I don't believe in the human being that becomes a wolf. Now, I did spend a lot of time on Indian reservations in Southwest. I don't discount their stories about the skinwalkers. I kind of accept that as true, because in that legend somewhere there's some truth. So I would say I'm very skeptical about the whole idea of werewolves. Dogman, on the other hand, is another story, because I believe that the Dogman is not a transformation. That they're a Dogman, they're always a Dogman. None of that ever changes. Now, where did they come from? That's, again, my own speculation is perhaps they are, and again, as some people use the parallel of the Bigfoot, is the Dogman a Nephilim, something that happened, an occurrence, or a creature that came into being when angels and women produced children? A lot of people say that's where Bigfoot came from, and that's quite a real possibility, I suppose. There's also a tribal legend of the Salish tribes up in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area, Puget Sound area, that in their creation legend, there is a figure that's a sort of a transformer who transformed just the general life into various types of beings, whether they're people, whether they're animals, whatever. And in their legend, there is a tribe called the Siabek that the transformer, I don't know whether they were resistant to the transformer, but somehow they did not get evolved. They did not take up what the natives call the soul power and become human. They became something sort of in between, kind of trapped in between. If Dogman something along that lines, quite possibly. But I believe he's Dogman, always Dogman, and I'm open to that belief, very open. I haven't had an encounter myself, but I don't discount those that say they do. I find if somebody's willing to come out and talk about that, I kind of believe what they have to say.
Now that you know about Dogmen, have you noticed that it's maybe a little bit more difficult to go out at night, or have you been totally unaffected by that?
Well, I haven't been affected by that. I haven't had that problem. I do. People say, don't go out camping alone. I still go out camping alone. It's not that I don't believe, and I passed the age where I consider myself immortal, but I'm just willing to take my chances, I guess, and maybe I shouldn't, but I do.
Well, you do have to live life, so I'm glad to hear that you're still able to go out and do all the things that you love to do, so that's great news.
I was going to talk about the Loup-garou and how one becomes a Loup-garou. There is one theory that says that the Loup-garou is born a Loup-garou, but does not actually transform until they taste human flesh. It's a legend a lot like the Wendigo. I don't find a lot of references to that one. Generally, a person that becomes a Rougarou, they were bitten by a Rougarou, and it is part of the legend too that usually you're a Rougarou for 101 days, and the last person bitten in that course of 101 days then becomes the Rougarou. Another way people say that you can become a Rougarou is to have a curse put on you by a witch or a voodoo priestess. They can put a curse on you, and for that 101 days, you'll become a Rougarou. The story often is that what happens is that the witch will transform themselves into a Rougarou, give you the bite, and then change themselves back. That's one way it goes. It's also possible to become a Rougarou by letting be known the real identity of the Rougarou. If you know who they are in the flesh, which person they are, and you tell that, you can become a Rougarou as well. Another way is if you look into their eyes that glow red, you will become a Rougarou as well. And then one last way, and this is where a lot of the ancient legend has its roots and its purposes, is that if you break Lent for 7 years in a row, you can become a Rougarou. And as far as the biting goes too, if you fail to keep Lent, you then become the target of the Rougarou, that you can be bitten and be transformed. So there was a bit of religious connotation there to keep people going the way that they were taught in church and not break that. The Rougarou was also used to sort of keep kids in line. You know, if you don't do what your parents say, the Rougarou will get you. And so that's sort of the uses of the Rougarou. There is a little bit of difference too in the Rougarou legend as compared with the werewolf, or at least some of the werewolf stories. The lore on the Rougarou says that they can change at will. They are not dependent on the moon, not even dependent on it being nighttime, although that's kind of the way that goes. It's more a nighttime kind of thing, but they can change at will. And they have not only a great strength, but their muscle mass actually increases when they become a Rougarou. And contrawise, when they're not the Rougarou during the daytime, they appear very sickly and weak. One other difference between the Rougarou and a lot of the werewolf stories we see is that a lot of the Rougarou stories, they have only the head and or maybe the hands of the wolf, and the rest of them is human in appearance. There are a few differences there. Also, the whole idea of the silver bullet. In my research, I could not find anywhere where silver bullets were ever used for a Rougarou. The only two ways to dispose of a Rougarou were to decapitate him or to burn him up. And so, yeah, the silver bullet legend kind of went by the wayside with that part of it anyway.
Out of all the topics you could have chosen for this new book, what possessed you to write a book about Rougarous?
This is my second sort of werewolf book. I'm kind of fascinated with the whole area in Louisiana, the Bayou country. And so I just kind of put the two of those things together. And, I had, like I said, I had this idea for this murder spree by the Rougarou. And one thing I wanted to do also with my Rougarou, in a lot of literature and movies, the werewolf character is usually seen as a type of a victim. They're cursed, and they hate their behavior. They hate because they change and they kill people. The original Wolfman was that way. Lon Chaney Jr. in the movie dreaded turning into the werewolf and killing. I see the same thing in the American Werewolf in London. Again, the same thing. Added to that was the friends and those that had been killed, urging them to kill themselves and break the curse. One other movie that some people have kind of compared my book to, I think mostly it's because of the setting, is in the early 70s, there was a movie made called The Moon of the Wolf that takes place in Cajun country, and it kind of introduces the term Rougarou to the public. But again, in this story still, it was sort of a family curse, and being good Southern families, we took care to protect the reputation of the family and those involved. And so it was kind of hidden, but the person still saw that as a curse and didn't like the part that, the curse drove them to kill. There are a few exceptions to this kind of rule with a werewolf story. One of them was in 2010, they made Wolfman again with Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins. And that kind of split that. The son character hated to be the werewolf. He hated the curse. He hated the killing. Whereas the father, played by Anthony Hopkins, his character loved being the werewolf. And he loved the godlike power of killing, and that went on. I think the only other one that really stands out to me that way is the Howling series. And I don't care much for any of it, the original. But again, in the original, you did have characters who embraced being the werewolf. They liked it. And when I set about to write this story, I wanted the whole investigation procedure to go on. I liked the character that I was building about the sheriff. When it came time to talking or thinking about how the werewolf was going to be, I wanted my werewolf to enjoy what he was doing. And that's a part of the story. The Rougarou in this story wants to be a Rougarou. He became a Rougarou on person. Again, talking about the curses. He gets the curse put on him on purpose so that he can become a Rougarou and that he can kill people that he wants to take revenge on without really, in a way, being the bad guy, even though he still is.
Makes you wonder how many people, if they have the option to choose whether to become a Rugurus or not, how many actually would. And unfortunately, quite a few people would, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a part of the story that I've written, is that the sheriff comes to realize, he figures out that, he tells the deputy, this Rougarou didn't just wander into town. It was made here. Became a Rougarou here for a reason. And they figure out as the story moves along that, hey, whoever turned this guy into a Rougarou is still out there, and there can be more. So that's another thing that they have to deal with in the course of the story. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of people, I think, that would take somebody up on it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And what's worse than having one Rougarou around town? 2 or more. Yeah, that'd be really bad.
Yeah, that becomes a problem.
Yes, it would. That it would. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about Rougarous, Loup-Garous, and werewolves. I think you cleared up several questions a lot of us had about them. I'm sure you did, at least. But having said that, thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.